Yeah, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. This is Michael Schindhelm speaking. This is our closing webinar within the online course CCAA, the Chinese Contemporary Art Award, as a case study on global culture. I hope that you can properly hear me. We are today in a rather smaller team of attendees, so that's why whenever you have questions, please don't hesitate, because I think it's very important that we get into a conversation, into interaction, and that requires that you ask some questions I can try to answer. During the last 6 weeks, you have been introduced to probably rather new content, which is related to the development of contemporary Chinese art over the last 30, 40 years, which is actually more or less the entire historical timeline since contemporary Chinese art has, for the first time, emerged. You may have understood that the course is based on a research we have conducted at the Zurich University of the Arts, the Institute of Contemporary Art, where we tried to study the involvement and instrumental impact the Swiss diplomat, former diplomat, entrepreneur and philanthropist Uli Sigg had on the recognition, collection, preservation and promotion of contemporary Chinese art since the outset. Mr. Sigg, as you probably have heard and learned, started as a manager for an international company. He introduced, you could say, market economy to China after the end of the Cultural Revolution in the end of the 70s, and therefore had an extraordinary exclusive access to the country, and later also as a diplomat to the art scene, which was just emerging in the beginning of the 90s. He created this award at a time when people wouldn't know much about the contemporary Chinese art and its evolution. And if I say people, then including the art scene in China itself. Because at that time there were no magazines, there were no art newspapers, there were no galleries, no museums. So there no whatsoever talks, public talks about the art scene in China. And with creating this award, Uli Sigg was able to gain a lot of information about artists, how they live, where they work, how they are communicating with each other, why they are doing their work, how they do to promote it, to maybe also sell it, to sustain, etc. So within just a few years, Uli Sigg became probably a connoisseur of contemporary Chinese art like probably nobody else, including the Chinese artists. And the second important step was that he invited scholars, curators from Western countries to come to China. And I'm speaking about 20 years ago, when China was not as attractive as it today. And he made them jurors in his jury for the Contemporary Chinese Art Award. So this is how he confronted major players in the art scene in the Western Hemisphere for the first time with the emergence of contemporary Chinese art. Among them was, for example, such an important figure like Harald Seemann, who in 1999 was the director of the Venice Biennale biennial. And this gentleman, Harald Seemann, at that time opened for the first time the huge space of the Arsenale as a part of the topography of the biennial in Venice, and made a lot of space for contemporary Chinese art. At that time, China didn't have its own pavilion, so therefore there was actually Chinese art almost never on display. And suddenly, with the biennial 1999, everything changed. I think around 30 artists from China were presented by Harald Seemann, among them also some major figures like Ai Weiwei for the first time. So that's why many collectors, curators, museum people, audiences, journalists got to know about contemporary Chinese art for the first time through this channel. And it's probably no surprise that it became an enormous success. The prices skyrocketed for contemporary Chinese art. Many shows started in the Western Hemisphere on contemporary Chinese art. Artists became noted, became even famous, and made their way into the global art scene. So this is a bit the story behind our course. And yeah, now it's probably time to follow up. I was already asked a few questions in advance, and I would like to answer those questions on the course itself. There is one major thing to mention, because some of you have already asked this question recently, why we did not portray artists themselves. I have to say the course was really limited to 6 weeks, and we had to share a lot of information we have gained in our research, including also conversations with the collector himself, with the curator of a large show in Bern, which is currently on display with more than 300 artworks from the collection of Uli Sigg and the M+ collection in Hong Kong. So it was a little bit another focus. I could imagine to run another course just portraying artists, because it is such a vast material, such a vast territory. What happened, because in the meantime you can say that the contemporary Chinese art, although being very young, has already produced 3 generations of artists, and therefore I would say in the meantime several, probably 10,000s of people would claim to be artists and live either in China, mainland China, or in Taiwan, Hong Kong, or somewhere else in overseas. So therefore it's an enormously broad context. However, I want to turn your attention onto some aspects of our course. You will find in the course program and material a list of the people who have been awarded the either Best Artist or Best Young Artist awards. So that gives you already an idea on who, in the eyes of the jury and in the eyes of the collector Uli Sigg, were the most important artists in China over the last almost 20 years or so. So that would help you also to research on your own more about, in particular, these people. There is also a conversation I conducted with Ai Weiwei half a year ago in his studio in Berlin about his own career and his own work since the 90s, and his connection to both Uli Sigg and the CCAA. This is a long interview we have also put in the additional material of our course, and I would like to ask our supervisor and co-moderator also today, Renato Soldenhoff, who is online also here, to put in the chat the link to this interview, so that you later on can watch this interview I conducted with Ai Weiwei in September last year in Berlin. As I say, there's much more to say about that subject. Maybe I can just draw your attention on one thing which seems to me quite interesting, because I, in parallel, did a film about the life of Uli Sigg in China. As we know, he was not only an entrepreneur, he was also a diplomat, and finally became this very instrumental art collector who donated a major part of his collection in 2012 to a new developed museum called M+ in Hong Kong. I did this film, and the film is not only about Uli Sigg, but it is about also the modernization of the country, China, and in particular also how contemporary Chinese art reflected the social and political changes in the country. So there are a few major artists participating very substantially in the film to this story, And I would like to share with you quickly my screen. 1 second, please. So what you see here now, probably, if all goes well, is the website of Uli Sigg, to the film, The Chinese Lives of Uli Sigg, the film I have created in spring this year and has been released. The film has been released so far only in Switzerland, but will be released soon also worldwide. So in some of your countries, you may then get the film also in movie theaters. Otherwise, the film is already available on certain websites as a DVD or also on iTunes. But I'm not saying this here for propaganda reasons, but rather go on the website www.ulisigmovie.com, and you find also the list of the artists who are involved. You see it now on my screen here in this movie, and some more information about them. Some of them are, by no surprise, also winners of the Best Artist or the Best Young Artist award. So therefore, they have this kind of important relationship. Okay, going back to your questions. Another one, what drove you personally to create this course and also this online formats? Yeah, on the one hand, I have to say, as a cultural worker in various fields over the time, I was particularly impressed by the development and production of art and culture in China. The reason is that I have worked also in other parts of the world, like in the Middle East, for example. In Dubai, I was, for example, working 10 years ago for several years as an advisor to the government in order to develop culture and arts in the Emirates of Dubai or of the United Emirates. I was also working in Oman. I was also working in Jordan, in Russia, and in other countries. But I have never encountered this enormous energy, this enormous productivity I have seen and I have witnessed in China, which doesn't mean that the other countries are not fertile in art production or will be fertile in the future. But you can clearly see that China is really the leading country also among the emerging countries, and keeping up with, or catching up with, the development of culture and arts in the Western Hemisphere. It is the by far probably largest cultural space in the world, and therefore it has an enormous potential in the development of culture and arts. So I'm mentioning this here because I think it's very important to understand that China, like also in other industries, or let's say in other social fields, is really a country which has encouraged its people to create art and culture. And I'm not saying the government of China necessarily, but simply the nation. You see that there is, of course, a lot of critical response among artists to the social condition in China, to the political condition in China, and it has become totally inconceivable that artists are not involved in the social debates, in discourses this country has to conduct, and at the same time this country also leads within a kind of global discussion about our world. So you see that many of these younger artists in particular, in the meantime, have become international players. They wouldn't consider themselves necessarily anymore exclusively Chinese artists. They see themselves as international artists being presented by galleries in the West, also active in other countries like in Russia, in the former communist countries elsewhere, in Africa, in Australia, everywhere. And that's why I think it's an extraordinarily interesting subject. And I thought that as China has become this kind of international phenomenon, it would be good to conduct an online course giving access to many people around the world to the knowledge we have gained on that subject. There's another question, how will the CCAA develop in the upcoming years? I'm of course, I don't own the crystal ball and don't want to really make too many speculative predictions. However, I would say what is pretty clear is that the CCAA was the first, and it is probably still the most acknowledged, also internationally acknowledged award in contemporary Chinese art. But it's not the only one anymore, and it's not even the most maybe financially rewarding one, because there are other awards given by international players also, but also by Chinese players, for example companies, for example wealthy individuals who have created other awards, and that will go on. So there's in the meantime a competition, and therefore also a competition about who knows best, who are the really important artists in China today. I think what is still a kind of unique selling point of the CCAA is that over time they managed to create, I would even say, an academia of scholars from Western countries and China who are and have contributed to decision making over artists, and have contributed to the development of an enormous knowledge and network. And I think this is really outstanding, and that's why I think also in the future the CCAA is a kind of exclusive and very important award. The second thing is that whereas others have really to sustain, and we have to see how long they will really survive, because an award is only useful if it's given continuously over a long period of time and is a kind of reliable institution. CCAA has proven to be something like this, because they're existing in the meantime almost for 20 years. They have their own space. They have even grown into something larger and more sustainable. They have their own archive, and they run also exhibitions and other activities, as you could learn from our course. So that's why I think it will remain an important prize, but however, it has also to sort of readjust to the fact that the landscape has changed. And probably most importantly, the diversification of the award shows that they're not focusing today only anymore on the most successful and important artists of our time, but also on the young generation. And I think this is very important, that there are institutions supporting the youngest among the artists today in China, and also create a kind of excellence and judgment about excellence for that generation. And finally, as you know from the course, the CCAA also awards in the meantime critics, which is something also absolutely exclusive, which means that scholars now can receive grants for their research and for producing knowledge about the contemporary Chinese art. All these things are really signs that the CCAA is able to readapt to a changing landscape. And as far as I know from Mr. Sigg, they are also planning to launch a new branch for the CCAA, awarding institutions who show excellence in their work. Because again, a lot of new institutions have been created in China, but it's a question, of course, how they are operating, how they're managing to get interesting and proper collections together, how these collections really reflect the development of Chinese contemporary art, and how they enable audiences to learn about this, to embrace this. So I think this could be another, let's say, chapter for the CCAA in the near future. The next question is, what major changes do you see in contemporary Chinese art in the future? It's indeed, again, a kind of speculative point, because I do think that we have, and that's really the amazing and fascinating part of this development and of this time. We have to face a growing variety of expressions and therefore also of developments and changes in the landscape of contemporary Chinese art. As I said, we have already 3 generations who are creating contemporary Chinese art and have started doing so since the late 70s. And in the meantime, like almost everywhere in the world, constantly new trends are created, new trendsetters are discovered. So it has become extremely competitive, extremely at the same time diverse. There are certain, let's say, movements or certain artists, certain art groups who try to really become very international, very successful, and they are comparable with the most successful artists in the West, like, let's say, Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons, who have become extremely commercial at the same time, who are recognized by major public museums in the West, who are collected by the most prestigious collectors. At the same time, you see also the opposite. You see movements, you see groups of artists who rather try everything to stay out of the mainstream and to do their own thing regardless how much this will be commercially rewarded. And this is again something you find also internationally, that artists who are creative are not necessarily all following the crowds, pleasing the crowds, or trying to make a lot of money. There's an enormous variety of positions among artists today. There is an enormous variety of media being used by artists today because of the fact that, due to the fact that, of course, the younger generation now is looking very much into new media, new forms of communication, new forms of production. What is also important to say and to remember is that when Uli Sigg did his first big show in Bern in 2005 under the title Mahjong, a show which was then later traveling throughout the world. For example, in Brazil, the show had been seen by 500,000 visitors. So it was the first landmark exhibition of contemporary Chinese art traveling around the world. That was 12 years ago, and Uli Sigg at that time, or 11 years ago, at that time asked the participating, I think, 200 artists, 80 artists, what they think about the Chineseness of their work. And he got very contradictory answers. There were people seriously almost writing essays, and you can read all these essays in the catalog to the exhibition Mahjong until today. But there were others simply rejecting also this question, saying that it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just an artist. I don't care about China. I don't care about Chineseness. So already at that time, there was an enormous diversity of answers. I think this has become even stronger. You feel that some artists, on the one hand, find it even more important to work on their own identity, to do their work around their own identity. And there are other works, other artists who totally abolish and reject their Chineseness and their origins, and would say, we are just becoming part of the global crowd, and you wouldn't ask necessarily if Anish Kapoor is an Indian or a British or whatsoever artist. He's just an artist being recognized as such worldwide, and we want to become also recognized worldwide, regardless if we are Chinese, Taiwanese, or Chinese living overseas, etc. So that's why there is a growing diversity, and it's unpredictable how things will go on, but certainly it will be very exciting to follow these trends. Another question, what are the expectations regarding M+? There was something very important happening recently, and I think we mentioned this earlier already in the course. For the first time recently, the M Plus Museum in spring this year has put on display around 60 works from the Sigg M Plus collection. And as far as I know, this was an enormous success. So you know that the museum itself has not been established yet, so they have always to look for other spaces to show their exhibitions. So they went into a shopping mall and found a space called Art Tree, and there they put on display these 60 important artworks representing maybe the DNA of the contemporary Chinese art of the early years, meaning the 80s and the 90s, mostly artwork created by artists who have written history in the meantime and are very well known. And not only the artwork is shown, but at the same time they created a kind of information context around the artwork itself, trying to sort of classify, telling a narrative about what happened in China while this artwork had been created from the 70s with the end of the Cultural Revolution, or even before, when for the first time artists tried to understand and interpret art in a contemporary way. This was an enormous success with several 10,000 people having visited this show. I was there, I could see that people were queuing every day there to get in, and many people came also from mainland China to see that show. So you could also see that Hong Kong is already establishing itself as a platform to allowing not only its own population but also mainland Chinese to go and see artworks they so far are not able to see in mainland China. So I think this was a first try for the M Plus to position itself as the first recognized and important contemporary Chinese art museum worldwide with this kind of excellent excellent collection. And therefore I think this is the trend the M Plus will probably follow up with, showing more artwork of that kind and trying to prepare an audience before the real opening in 2019. I do think that it will be an enormously important step in the history of contemporary Chinese art when M Plus is going to be open. I do think that also after 2019, Hong Kong still will enjoy this kind of autonomous status, allowing to show things in its museum which are otherwise difficult to put on display in mainland China. So it will attract audiences from all over mainland China, from other parts of Asia, but also international players. And therefore, Hong Kong may become really one of the major art destinations in a similar way like London, Berlin, New York, San Francisco, or Paris. The next question, you chose to do a MOOC about this topic. Why did you choose this format? All right. First of all, I have to say this was the first of its kind for the Zurich University of the Arts, and I was happy to join to support the university in developing this format and make first experiences with it. I must say, as somebody who has worked internationally a lot over the last decades with people of different disciplines, I always enjoy working in this kind of multidisciplinary manner and also multi-generational manner. And therefore, for me, it was really an interesting new experience to work with a university on how to disseminate a certain knowledge we have gained in advance in order to share it with an audience, I would say, of students across the globe. And it was really interesting. There were people from South America, from Australia, from New Zealand, Canada, and of course Europe and China joining this course. So in many ways you could say it was really massive, and it proved that the contemporary Chinese art, in particular also the Contemporary Chinese Art Award, and Uli Sigg as a collector attracted a lot of interest, and therefore confirmed that this type of online education is something very valuable. Another question is here, is there any internship or job opportunity in M+ or other museums about contemporary art of China we can apply? Yes, I do think that if you go on the website of M+, you will see that there is a branch telling you about career opportunities, and it's a very young profession to be somebody knowing about contemporary Chinese art, and at the same time it is certainly a growing field of interest. So I do think that it would be worthwhile if you look up, for example, the website of M+, and you also will find probably similar possibilities in other museums. I'm just giving you an example, which is the National Gallery of Singapore, which is not necessarily focusing on Chinese art, but at the same time is, of course, in Southeast Asia always in a kind of dialogue with mainland China and its development of art and culture, and therefore it would be also interesting to look into this museum, because in particular the National Gallery is already established, but it's a very young institution. It had been founded only 6 months ago. It is a very big institution, collaborating already with international museums. For example, recently there was a show in collaboration with the Centre Pompidou in Paris. So there's a lot of things coming up in the region. I know that also in Southeast Asia there are more museums created, and first and foremost, of course, in mainland China. So therefore, I do think, regardless of how much there is also censorship, how much there's limited freedom of expression, there will be more and more outlets, there will be more and more institutions on contemporary Chinese art. It's also worthwhile probably to look into the Chinese, the CAFA, the Central Academy for Fine Arts in Beijing. Some of the scholars teaching there, including the major, let's say, scholar of the Sigg Collection itself, the first director of the CCAA, his name is Li, and he was also not only mentioned, but he was also contributing to our course several times, and is now the curator to the M+ Sigg Collection in Hong Kong at the M+ Museum. Mr. Li is one of the teachers at the CAFA, the Central Academy Fine Arts in Beijing. So in other words, please go online, research as much as you can, look up the museums, look up their websites, you may find some opportunities. I get another question here, and that's about the future of our work. I do think, so the question is, are there some future MOOCs about about Chinese contemporary art? I could imagine that we do at some point also another MOOC about, for example, specifically artists. I mentioned already today that 3 generations of artists are working in the field of contemporary art today in mainland China and abroad. So therefore, it would be certainly interesting to go more into details about who are these people, what they are doing, how they relate also to international trends in the art scene, how successful they are, etc. So there is certainly much more material and much more stuff to develop, to think about, and to share. Next question, can we have your email address for future questions regarding? Yes, certainly. I think the best way is that you follow up on my journal, because you can also send me personal messages to my account here within the course. I have my personal journal, and you can contact me there. If you want to contact me otherwise, I would like you to visit my website, which is easy to access. You just Google my name and you find my website because it's has the same domain like my name, and there you have also an opportunity to get in touch with me, and then we can respond, of course, to your questions. It would be nice to follow up also after this course. Any other question? So it seems as if there's nothing else to share for now. I would like to, before I finish this course, I would like to inform you that we believe that, as I said already, that there will be a continuation, there will be more courses, maybe even on contemporary Chinese art, but also on other subjects, like, for example, culture and arts in big cities, in emerging cities in particular. We are preparing a course which may show how global and local art have to renegotiate their relationships under the condition of a very fast forward process of urbanization, in particular in Asia today. So we will, to some extent, maybe even reconnect to the material and the context and the content of this course. And I don't want to forget that this course is over for now, but at the same time we'll restart very soon again. So there will be similar scenarios like now, 6 weeks on CCAA. So if you haven't been able to follow the course from the very beginning, you are welcome to restart together with us very soon. There will be information available on the website about when we start the course again, when there will be also more interactive seminars like this with me and with other players in the near future. So that's why I want to say goodbye to you now, but I think there will be possibilities to reconnect anytime soon. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your participation. I hope that you learned something about this, I believe, extraordinary subject of contemporary Chinese art and how the CCAA itself became a case for studying the development and history of this art. I wish you all the best for your personal and professional future. And as I said, hope to be in touch again. Bye-bye.